My name is Tony Byrne from Real Story Group, and welcome to today's webinar, The Right Way to Select Web CMS Technology. I'm really excited about this topic. It's a topic that's really near and dear to our hearts because we've been helping organizations select technology, and specifically WCM technology, for really the past 15 years. And, you know, as advisors, we often try to be nuanced and say things like it depends, or really get into people's context before we make specific recommendations. But this is one of those rare times when we can truly say there is a right way and a wrong way to do this. And over the years, we've really come to believe that there's, in particular, a right way to select any technology, but particularly Web CMS technology. And that's what I'm going to share with you today. All of you who are participating in the webinar, you'll all receive a copy of the deck. So you'll get that in the next 24 hours or so. Those of you who are Real Story Group subscribers, you'll also have access to a full recording of the entire presentation as streaming video. If you have any questions at all, or any comments, or anything you disagree with, feel free to use the questions tab in your GoToMeeting control panel. You can just type in any question at any time. If you want to have a little back channel conversation on Twitter, you can use the hashtag at the bottom of the screen, RSGWebinar. So we're going to be together for half an hour today, but you will have a chance to ask questions, and we'll pause in the middle and we'll pause at the end. It's going to be a fast-paced session, so we'll definitely have some time at the end to take your questions and comments. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Those of you who know Real Story Group know we're an analyst firm. We provide advice based on very hard-hitting research. We analyze the weaknesses and strengths of the tools and the vendors. And then for our subscribers, we advise them on successful technology selection and strategies around making better use of the technologies that they already have. So our subscribers call us up on the phone, usually around the time when they're about to make a decision. We help them step through some of the pros and cons of the different choices in front of them. You may have seen our digital workplace and marketing technology vendor map. These are all the different tool sets that we evaluate, and the different vendors, all organized according to kind of a tube map or a subway map here, with the different colors representing different technology marketplaces. You can also download a copy of this map if you look at the little control panel for GoToWebinar. You'll see there's a little blue area that says handouts below questions, and if you just click on that, you can it will open up this map as a PDF, and you can save it, print it, put it on your wall, what have you, share it with friends. This is a way of sort of helping to understand what vendors do what and what are your different choices. And the reality is, of course, you have many, many, many choices in almost all of these landscapes. You have at the center very large vendors who tend to dominate a lot of the mind share, not always necessarily from a marketplace or market share perspective. And the light blue line, which is the WCM line we're talking about today, is relatively crowded. There's close to 40 different vendors that we cover. It's what we call a highly fragmented marketplace, which makes it all that more critical that you really get to know what it is are the key decision points. So what I'm going to describe today is kind of a methodology for getting there. And the key word in this methodology, this whole selection methodology, is agile. Now, I know that this word gets kind of overused, but in this case, we think it's really apt. So I'll just invite you to use the questions panel in your GoToMeeting control panel. And if I said agile, what are some of the key precepts of agile? What are some words that come to mind when I say agile? Those of you who practice agile, what does it mean? Any of you, just type in what comes to mind when I say agile. So Matthew's saying iterative. Amen, Matthew. That is dead on. Flexibility, Sarah, absolutely right. Being able to shift gears quickly, fast changing. That's right, Ruben. The other one that's really critical around agile, Matthew mentioned prioritization. That's really important because In a selection process, we have a tendency to see organizations sort of ask for a lot of different things without stressing what's important to them. Responsive, definitely. And the key thing, I think, Charles, around responsiveness is really being empirical or test-based. And so that's going to be a key precept. So thanks, folks. I think you've got a good sense for what Agile is, or at least some of the key concepts. And now I'm going to elaborate sort of how some of those concepts play out. So this is the non-Agile approach to evaluating vendors, but unfortunately they're all too common. And so these are 4 choices you shouldn't use. The first one is what we might call the horse race. And so this is a traditional sort of analyst firm if you're going to have waves or quadrants that says, well, definitively one horse is ahead, so you ought to pick the leading horse. And of course the reality is that technology is not a horse race. It's for one thing, it never ends. And what is the leading horse for one person could be definitely a lagging horse for another. The second approach we also see quite frequently in the WCM space is this sort of love at first sight. Oh, I see it. It was an awesome demo. I've seen people, for example, with Sitecore. They go marketing, go get my Sitecore. And it is wonderful. I love that. Let's buy it. And the reality is that Sitecore and everybody else in this marketplace has substantial competitors, and they're really quite different. You need to be more careful about the way you approach this. The third one is what we call the My Cousin Vinny. So you see that in the upper right. My cousin Vinny uses WordPress, so I'm going to use WordPress. And you definitely don't want to take that approach. Now, it is worthwhile doing your research and checking with your peers and understanding sort of what's going on in your industry, but the reality is that you're going to be, your organization's digital goals and objectives are going to be, could be quite different. In fact, that may be something very differentiating for you. And so you don't want to just go with the herd all the time. The fourth one we see a lot in large organizations, which we describe as happiness is a stack of warm binders. It's this idea that, oh, if I just gather all of these requirements and cross-reference them back to all of our business objectives and develop these advanced Excel spreadsheets, that I'm going to find some mathematical, almost statistical way of figuring out which vendor is the best one. And this is really kind of a quasi-scientific approach. It usually doesn't lead you to the best choice. So this is an example, hat tip to my friend Martin White, of this notion of a quadrant. We call this the mystical quadrant. Obviously, we're joking here, but the point is that in this landscape you saw on that Metro map, you know, there's 36 different WCM vendors. You can't really plot them necessarily as losers and winners here. You have to really look at them a little bit differently. And at the end of the day, you don't want to just guess. I think people go through these exhaustive and very non-agile approaches, and it just tires them out, and they say, okay, well, just the hell with it. Let's just go with whoever, you know, they just go essentially on gut. And you don't want it necessarily come down to that, to be so exhausted by the whole process that you'll just sort of accept, you know, whichever is the cheapest or the salesperson who called you most recently. You really want to be much more methodical about it. And so what we recommend is what we call a testable process. And this is a testable iterative process where first you come up with a sort of a longest short list of plausible vendors. There's a variety of different ways of doing that. I'm going to show you an example of it in a minute. Obviously, I sell research for a living, and I produce research, and so I'm a big believer in research, but there's a lot of different ways of getting to a short list, a long list. And, you know, you want to really narrow down your choices, again, ideally through some research and vetting, to maybe 6 to 8 to whom you would send an RFP. We're big believers in RFPs. I know there's a lot of people who are jaded about that. When they're done right, they can truly educate you, educate the vendor, and help you get to the right match. Then, based on that, ideally, you would test 3 or 4 vendors by going through a demo process. Not where they're demoing their stuff, but where they're demoing your use cases. So we'll talk about that in a second. So that's essentially your test scripts. Then, maybe most importantly of all, do this whole iterative process is to have a bake-off or a proof of concept, ideally with 2 vendors where you're testing head-to-head and you're really getting hands-on with the tool. And when you get hands-on with the tool and with any potential advisor implementation team, systems integrator, agency, so forth, that's when you know whether A, you've got the right technology, and B, you have the right partners. Now, there's different ways of collapsing this. A lot of times you can You can collapse phase, the RFP and the demo phase, maybe grandfather some people in. We've advised some of our subscribers in doing this in as short as 6 weeks. But again, if you shortcut here, though, you will definitely face some trade-offs as well, not necessarily get to the right decision. So we really encourage people to be iterative about this, be moving it at a rapid clip, but take the amount of time that you need to get to a good decision. And you have a lot of choices here. I'll just remind you once again, by the way, that you can use the questions tab in GoToMeeting if you have any questions or comments at any time during this presentation. So these are the 36 vendors that we evaluate. We recently, just this morning, ended up shifting some of these around. We just today released the latest version, version 22.5 if you're counting, of our WCM evaluation report. We moved a couple of vendors around, dropped a couple, added a new one here, Crafter in the middle, Crafter Software. So there's a lot of different ways to slice and dice vendors, and I'll show you an example of that in a second. But we think the most meaningful approach here is to look at it on a complexity spectrum, where you have simpler products on the far right end of the spectrum, and then more complex platforms on the far left end of the spectrum here. This complexity usually is also related to cost, implementation time, developer intensivity, so on and so forth. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. I just wanted to isolate this category here of legacy platforms. These are some of the big players in the market from, say, 15 years ago. These typically are systems that you leave rather than you license from a WCM perspective. These are some of the fading giants. But among these other 32, a lot of plausible, solid choices. These are vendors or open source communities that have been around usually for a decade or more. I think count to dozens, if not hundreds, if not thousands of implementations. And so they are all plausible choices. I talked a little bit about this product versus platform perspective, and I think this is maybe one of the most important things to sort out first. Platforms are very attractive, they demo well, but they are also costly and complex, and often are more developer intensive, take more time to deploy. So you've really got to make sure, do I have the internal capacity to truly exploit something that was on the left end of that spectrum? And we find that you actually face a greater risk of overbuying than underbuying. And in fact, getting a platform and not having the capability to actually exploit it can slow you down. So you want to be really careful about not overestimating your own ability to actually leverage some of the advanced capabilities like personalization, multi-site management, and so forth. When you really do need a platform is when you have very specific plans on heavily customized content-driven applications, a lot of media companies, for example. If you have unusually complicated systems integration needs, like you're doing some really sophisticated B2B commerce, you're in a multinational, multilingual digital engagement environment. That right away typically puts you more towards the platform end. Then the other thing, and this is really critical, is you better have a solid team of in-house developers and not just rely completely on a systems integrator and agency, because you are going to need those developers on an ongoing basis, not just with the initial implementation. So the other thing that one of you mentioned about Agile is that it should be team-based. So we talked about the process here, and really the first part of the process is to put together an interdisciplinary selection team, ideally led by business stakeholders, but including various people from IT, potentially legal or others, who can all jointly bring their own expertise and their interests to bear. And then what you want to do is look for the right fit. So there's different types of fit here. We'll talk in a minute of that. Maybe one of the most important ones is scenario fit, but then obviously technology fit. Will it work within your architecture? The right partner, increasingly critical. Can you get the right partner to help you implement and then enhance the system over time? And then, of course, value. Right? So there's definitely radically different total cost of ownership structures across these different systems, and so what's the right value for you is also. It's rare that you really, hit the mark on all four of these. Often it involves some kind of a trade-off that may be something that isn't a great technology fit, could be a really good partner fit, could be the right value. And so that's some of the discussions you want to have here is business feature and scenario fit maybe versus partner and technology fit. Understand those sorts of trade-offs, and that can help you get to the right decision. Now, in our research, we do look at certain features and functions, and in our research, we break down these different things: technology, services. How much does this really matter, right? A lot of people just start diving right into features and feature set and feature functionality, and we can go there with you in our research or in our advice too. But we think that the most critical thing to look at is what we call scenario fit or usage scenarios. In other words, you're going to want to do different sorts of things with this platform. You may want to build some information sites, maybe some landing pages, maybe some adaptive mobile-oriented sites, potentially some community-oriented. Do you need to do multi-channel publishing? Are you in a global enterprise? Do you have digital workplace scenarios? These are things that are actual use cases for this technology, and this is a use case-driven approach, which you want to have in Agile. This is really the best way to filter down and to understand how you match up. So again, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to put them in the comments field of GoToWebinar, and I'll also remind you that you're all going to get a copy of the presentation, including you, Jacob, and those of you who are Real Story Group subscribers, you will also get a full recording of this. So let's take a look at a sort of scenario-based selection process here. I'm logged into our website at realstorygroup.com as a subscriber. And one of the things here that we can do is generate a custom research report. So the two options are I know what vendors I want to compare, or help me come up with a short list of vendors. So now we're going through this exercise of coming up with a short list of vendors. So let's go ahead and do that for web content and experience management. I could have picked a different segment, but let's start with web content and experience management. I'm going to say right now that I don't have a technology preference. I might have maybe picked .NET or something, but I'm going to say that I don't have a technology preference. I'm open to license models. I'm open to considering both on-premise as well as cloud. And right now, for geographic footprint, let's say any region, okay? So these are some basic filters. We've talked about those before. But here's the more important filters, which are what are my key scenarios? So let's say, I need to do microsites and landing pages. I want to do some special stuff around mobile, and I have an ultra large single site. So maybe I'm a media company or a large association or federal agency. I've got some microsites, but otherwise I've got this big, huge publishing operation, probably very metadata rich. So now let's just see what the wizard tells us here. So what this does then is show you that, there are a lot of different choices. And what's interesting here about the different vendors here, and then we get into some of the strengths and weaknesses. What's interesting about some of the different vendors here is that their scores are going to score differently based on the scenario, which is really interesting because it suggests that one vendor can be good at one thing but not necessarily good at another. So once again, it's sort of working through, some of these trade-offs. I could go back and maybe change some of those scenarios and potentially come up with a different sort of vendors here. Let's go with basic digital marketing here and then finish. And there's 32 vendors that match here, and I can maybe, though I want a kind of a tighter fit, and then it's down to there's 11 here, and I can output this to Excel and to images and stuff like that, and review some of the strengths and weaknesses of the different vendors, and then output all this to presentations for my peers. So you get the point, is that what you really want here is to do some filtering, and you can filter by geography, you can filter by delivery model, all sorts of things, but the really key filter is not technology, license, or delivery model, maybe geography, but the key filter is really around what are these scenarios here: mobile site, basic digital marketing, microsite and landing pages, and they want to add some more scenarios here, but that's how you really want to get to the right fit. Okay, so let's say you've gone through and you've identified what are your key scenarios. That's what you want to bake into your RFP, right? And that's how you're going to get to your short list of vendors as well. You want to avoid checklist RFPs. The vendors have seen all of the questions. They can check all the boxes. It's not particularly helpful for you or for them. What you really want to do is tell a story around how you're going to use this technology. And again, this is a very agile approach. And agile is all about storytelling, right? What's the story? And so what you want are testable narratives. This is part science and part art. We've got a particular structure for doing this and some templates, and this is a lot of what we do with our subscribers to sort of help them think through what are some key scenarios and how to describe them, and we provide some samples for them. What's interesting, I find, over the last 5 years, just talking with a lot of our subscribers about this, is that you're all getting better at this, and so that's really heartening. I think as an industry, we're learning how to tell these testable stories and really enumerate, not in a prescriptive way, but in a descriptive way, what are some of the things that we want our own colleagues to be able to do, and then what do we want the customer experience to be like? What can customers do? And then that helps vendors fill in how you get there. So this should really be the centerpiece of your RFP and any kind of vendor demos, and then ultimately you get down to 2 or 3 vendors, and here's what we say: you really want to hold a bake-off in your own kitchen. So what this means is, there's different types of pie here, but you don't know which one is going to be ideal for you. They're all tasty at some level, but one of them is going to be tastier or easier to make. And so the only way to do it is to try it, to really get hands-on. So use those same use cases and scenarios, but get trained on the technology, both from a business perspective and from a developer perspective, and spend a week or 2 actually banging on the tools and working with a partner if you're bringing in a partner. And that's how you know for sure that this was a good fit from a scenario perspective, from a value perspective, from a technology perspective, and from a partner perspective. And what you'll discover is that CMS tools have a lot of different interface styles and a lot of different ways of approaching. So they may be kind of feature equivalent at some level, but the user experience can be radically different. And you can't always tell that from a demo, but you'll definitely tell it when you actually start working in these tools. The other thing, of course, to look at is vendor intangibles. We're expanding this part of our research fairly heavily. It's not just about the technology, it's also about the vendor itself. Is it a good fit for you? What is their delivery model? How can you get support? What does the roadmap look like? Viability and stability, which I'll just make a point there about viability and stability, is a lot of times people seem to want to find cover among a larger vendor. One thing to remember is that vendor size is not necessarily a good predictor of the stability or the viability of the actual technology. Vendors sometimes will, in fact, larger vendors will often kill a product much more readily than a smaller vendor will. But still, viability and stability, key consideration, something we spend a lot of time looking at in our research. And then, of course, the broader ecosystem, so critical in any decision that you make. There's different types of ecosystems. We find that there's a lot of commercial vendors are adopting a lot of the sort of ecosystem type traits that you see in open source as well. And so this is a big part of, you're not just selecting a technology, you're joining an ecosystem. What does it look like? Is it actually going to work for you? This is an area now where we're spending a lot of time sort of comparing and contrasting the capabilities of the different vendors. Then you've got to come down to a decision. And we like to say, consult a professional if you experience a decision meeting longer than 4 hours. We call this the selectile dysfunction. And this is the wrong way to go about it. If something if you're sort of haggling over 2 vendors or 3 in terms of a down select, and you spend more than 4 hours debating this, then something has typically gone wrong. Now, one of the things that we try to do with our subscribers is help them identify, what are some key criteria for them. So here's an example of some criteria that it was important, sort of like the top 8 for one of our subscribers, and we help them identify that. And then they could kind of put the vendors sort of side by side and go from 5 down to 2. What was interesting here, they were debating, they knew that they wanted vendor 1 to go on to the bake-off. They were debating between vendor 2 and vendor 5. This ultimately helped them clarify that they were going to go with vendor 5. What was interesting is that even though vendor 1 had a higher score coming out of the demos, it was vendor 5 who won in the bake-off. So once again, the bake-off is so critical for really getting hands-on with the tool, spending some time really getting to know the supplier and the technology, how well it's going to work for you in a very concrete setting. Oftentimes the results surprise you. They often surprise us. So it looks like maybe my screen has frozen here a bit. All right, conclusion. Agile, put together a team, put together a testable process, iterate it, and then adapt. Don't be afraid to, say, drop a vendor, add a vendor, come up with maybe a different partner if you didn't like the channel partner that was being introduced. This is the agile approach. And at the end, you come to a much better decision. And also what we find is that when you use this approach, particularly this kind of educational, team-based, test-based approach, is that you go from the selection and into the implementation much, much faster. Okay. Once again, I'll invite you to pose any kind of questions or things that you agree with or disagree with in the questions tab for GoToMeeting. Some are coming in already, and I'm happy to take more from you. First, I'll point out that you can download free samples of our research from our website. Here's some of the benefits of subscribing to Real Story Group. Save time, save money, align your team, avoid the wrong decision. You can see all this on our website. My favorite one here, though, is Become a Hero, and I think this is really the most rewarding part of my job, is working with many of you to really help you become the go-to person internally within your organization, who's the expert on this stuff and the person helping the organization make the right decisions and watching as your career then blossoms. So my wish for you is to become a hero in your own organization. But now let's turn to some of your questions. Brian is reiterating the need to have these bake-offs, particularly for things like migrations and integration, and that is very true. Integration is one of these sort of buzz phrases that people talk a lot about, but then tend to avoid specifics, and it comes up later and kind of bites them in the ass later because they weren't specific about what it was that they actually needed to integrate. And so taking the time to really test out the integration patterns is really critical. And yes, very often during a bake-off, we'll organize a kind of a mini migration or a test or a pilot migration, and then that helps you understand what's the level of effort for the entire migration, which in some cases can become the most costly and the most time-intensive part of any implementation. So Brian's also making the case for support in a specific vertical. This is really interesting. I'm not sure I agree with that, Brian, as far as web content management is concerned. I think that a lot of these issues are really horizontal in nature. For certain other things, like maybe digital asset management, document management, vertical expertise, because of the integration with business process, becomes really critical. For web content management, there's a whole raft of really canonical issues that you have to deal with, regardless of what industry you're in. So we have tended not to overweight a vendor's vertical expertise. I'm not saying it's unimportant. I just think that there are probably more important ways of finding the right fit. Okay. Jill is asking about Microsoft SharePoint and what is up with SharePoint. Well, SharePoint has never been a particularly good fit for all of those external-facing scenarios that I mentioned. Microsoft has tried over the years at different times to make the round peg fit into, or square peg fit into the round hole of what is fundamentally a document management system rather than a web publishing and experience management system. And Microsoft has really had kind of a tin ear for what particularly external engagement leaders need. And I think that's evident very much in the 2013 platform. And Microsoft itself is really kind of stepping away from this. There's rumors that maybe they would make an acquisition in this space. Tough to really make sense out of those rumors. I think you can assume for the time being that Microsoft is going to hold kind of steady state on this. But they have, by and large, left the WCM space for their partners. Carol's asking, what do I mean by a marketing portal? Well, that's a great question because it means a number of different things. We tend to distinguish between doing basic kinds of digital marketing to actually having a kind of a customer portal where I can come in and set my preferences and engage with you in a highly personalized way, even conduct some transactions. That tends to be sort of a more advanced marketing portal. Monica's asking, what do I think about the competition among WordPress, Drupal, Easy Publish, and I could also add in there certainly Joomla and any number of other PHP-based systems, or for that matter, any open source systems, or for that matter, any commercial systems. And I think that you know, the fact that there's so many different choices here speaks to the fact that there's a lot of different ways to organize the delivery of this technology. There's different commercial models, there's different delivery models, there's certainly different architectural models, even if you just look at the PHP open source based universe. The four vendors that you mentioned all have really quite substantially different architectures and also very different user experiences and different assumptions around the use cases that they're going to be deployed in. So to me, it's really indicative of the diversity of the different types of use cases in the web content management world, and that in turn has led to really great diversity in terms of the number of suppliers and the different sorts of use cases that they target. So once again, don't look at this as a kind of as a horse race, right? That one's ahead of another, that one is inherently better than another. Well, again, the vast majority of these systems that we cover, nearly 40 of them, have been around for more than a decade. They have a niche. They have a place. I can't say that they'll all be here a decade from now, but the fact that there's a highly fragmented marketplace really speaks to the fact that there's a wide variety of different needs among you, the customers. And my wish for you is to find the right fit. And if there's any way that we can help you at all, please don't hesitate to be in touch with us. So thank you for spending an all too fast half an hour together. I definitely enjoy these. Our team loves to do these. Please sign up on our mailing list to make sure that you find out about future webinars that talk not just about web content management, but also all the other technologies that we cover: digital asset management, enterprise social and collaboration, mobile, portals, and so forth. But for now, this is Tony Byrne from Real Story Group. Thanks again for joining.